Do you remember when romance wasn't measured in swipes or read receipts, but in handkerchiefs, glances, and Sunday strolls? Courtship once lived in the smallest details. A calling card left on a tray, a flower tucked into a book, a slow dance under lantern light. How did we let those tender rituals slip quietly into history? Let's revisit 100 forgotten ways love once spoke louder than words. Dropped handkerchief trick. Once upon a time, romance wasn't about sliding into DMs, but about the art of subtle theater. A woman might accidentally drop her handkerchief while strolling down the street, fully aware her intended suitor was watching. The handkerchief, dainty and perfumed, wasn't clumsy at all. It was an invitation. A gentleman would swoop in, return it with a bow or a smile, and voila, the ice was broken. Think of it as the 19th century version of liking someone's Instagram post, only with more embroidery and less Wi-Fi. It was innocent, calculated, and charmingly effective at sparking conversation. Hat tipping. In an age before emojis and text replies, men had a whole vocabulary built into their hats. A quick tip of the brim was more than polite. It was a nod of recognition, a respectful hello, and sometimes a subtle wink of interest. The gesture could be casual for acquaintances or deliberate and slow when directed at a lady who'd caught his eye. Imagine it as the analog version of a heart reaction on someone's story, understated but brimming with intent. Today, hats are mostly fashion statements, but back then, tipping one was a tiny ritual of charm and courtesy. Calling cards. Before unread texts piled up on phones, suitors announced their interest with calling cards. Small, elegant pieces of cardstock engraved with a name. Dropped off at a lady's home, the card was a silent messenger. I was here, I'm interested. Please take notice. Families collected them in trays near the parlor, a sort of analog inbox, where curved corners or folded edges carried secret meanings. Was it social, romantic, urgent? The card told all. It was equal parts business card, love note, and RSVP. Compared to today's blunt hey in a chat bubble, calling cards dripped with quiet sophistication. Borrowed books as coded messages. Long before Spotify playlists or TikTok trends, love often hid between the pages of a borrowed book. A gentleman might lend a novel, carefully underlining a passage that hinted at his feelings, while a lady could return it with a flower pressed between the leaves as silent reply. Sometimes, the book itself was the message. Choosing Byron's poetry over a farming almanac said plenty. Families thought it was just reading, but both hearts knew better. It was a secret courtship conducted in ink and paper, a quieter, more romantic version of slipping a flirty meme into someone's DMs today. Accidental encounters at the general store. Before dating apps manufactured chance meetings with algorithms, small-town romance thrived on the aisles of the general store. A young man might suddenly discover he needed flour the same moment a young woman happened to be buying sugar. Was it a coincidence? Hardly. These orchestrated errands became the perfect excuse for lingering conversations by the pickle barrel or candy counter. Parents saw it as wholesome shopping. Suitors saw opportunity. Every exchange smile carried more weight than a dozen text messages today. In a world without swipes, the general store was both a supermarket and social network, bustling with unscripted possibilities. Church pew glances. Sunday service wasn't only about hymns and sermons. It doubled as one of the safest spaces for courtship. With families lined up neatly in pews, young men and women stole discreet glances when they thought no one was looking. A lowered gaze, a quick smile, a hymn book held just a bit too close. It was the slow burn tension of a love story unfolding under stained glass. Strict parents might sit between them, but even so, hearts found ways to whisper through eyes. Compared to today's bold dating apps, Church pew glances were quiet, reverent sparks, holy ground for the art of flirting. Sidewalk etiquette, man on the outside. Once upon a time, a gentleman proved his worth not with flashy gifts, but with small acts of protection. Walking down the street, he would always take the outside position, closest to carriages, splashing mud, or runaway horses, leaving his companion shielded on the inside. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about duty and care. Women noticed. Men were judged by it. Today, we argue over who pays for dinner, but back then, keeping mud off her hem was the ultimate chivalry. In many ways, it was the original "I've got you covered, no Wi-Fi required." Polishing shoes just for her. In the days when appearances spoke louder than texts ever could, a young man's freshly shined shoes were more than vanity. They were a silent declaration. Every careful buff of leather before stepping out to call on a lady said, "You're worth the effort." Scuffed boots hinted at carelessness, while a mirror-like shine reflected respect, pride, and intention. It was the old-fashioned equivalent of ironing a shirt before a date, or spritzing on cologne today. Small detail, big message. Romance, after all, wasn't just whispered in words. Sometimes it gleamed right off the tips of a polished pair of shoes. Introducing oneself through family acquaintances. Before sliding into someone's DMs or swiping right, romance often needed a middleman, or more often, a middle aunt. A proper introduction usually came through trusted family friends or respected neighbors, ensuring that reputations stayed intact. "This is Mr. So-and-so, son of the blacksmith," carried far more weight than any dating profile could. It wasn't just about formality. It was about safety, community, and knowing that the person sitting across from you wasn't a total mystery. Today's version might be a friend setting you up on a blind date, but back then, it was practically the social seal of approval. Passing folded notes. Long before phones buzzed with secret texts under the dinner table, young hearts relied on scraps of paper folded into intricate little triangles. A note might slip from one desk to another in school, or be tucked quietly into a hymn book or jacket pocket. The handwriting carried weight, the slant of a letter, the smudge of ink, sometimes even a pressed flower hidden inside. Each fold felt like a layer of anticipation, unwrapping not just words, but intent. Compared to today's instant messaging, these notes were slower, riskier, and far more thrilling. The original unread message that made your heart race. Fan language, coded signals. In an era when direct flirting was scandalous, women armed themselves with the ultimate low-tech gadget, the hand fan. It wasn't just for cooling, it was a secret messaging system. A quick snapshot meant, "Leave me alone," while slowly fanning might whisper, "I'm interested." Dropping it on the floor, an invitation. Covering part of the face while peeking over the top, bold eye contact without saying a word. Imagine it as the Victorian version of emojis, only with lace and feathers instead of yellow faces. Entire romances sparked or ended based on the choreography of a single well-timed flick. Glove etiquette in dances. At formal balls, gloves weren't just fashion. They were part of the unspoken dialogue of courtship. A gentleman's hand on a lady's gloved palm kept things proper, ensuring decorum even as they spun dangerously close during a waltz. But gloves could also bend the rules. Removing one, ever so casually, hinted at trust or intimacy. A glimpse of skin carrying more weight than an entire season of dating shows today. Gloves protected reputation while allowing just enough mystery to keep hearts racing. In a way, they were the velvet boundary lines of romance. Polite, polished, and full of secret meaning. Secret initials carved in trees. Long before Instagram couples posted matching selfies, young lovers left their mark on bark. Carving initials into a tree trunk often with a shaky pocket knife, was both reckless and romantic, a permanent stamp of a fleeting moment. The heart-shaped outline promised forever, even if forever sometimes lasted only through summer break. To stumble on those initials years later was like finding a time capsule of love, weathered but still legible. Today, we curate digital footprints that vanish with a deleted app. Back then, the forest itself became the scrapbook, holding secrets of courtships whispered under its leafy canopy. Hair ribbons, gifted as tokens. In the days when small gestures spoke louder than grand displays, a simple hair ribbon could carry the weight of a promise. A young woman might slip hers into the hand of a suitor before he left for a journey, or tie it to his wrist as a quiet claim of affection. Bright, well-worn, or carefully stitched, the ribbon became a portable reminder of her presence, soft, personal, and far more intimate than a store-bought trinket. Unlike today's mass-produced merch or couples hoodies, this token was humble yet powerful, fluttering like a whispered secret each time he caught sight of it. Courting dances, square dances, waltzes. Long before neon-lit clubs and wedding DJs, the dance floor was a social battlefield of glances, steps, and carefully measured touches. A square dance brought entire communities together, giving shy suitors a sanctioned chance to spin a partner's hand or catch her smile under lantern light. The waltz, scandalous at first for its closeness, became the ultimate slow dance, hearts pounding in time with the orchestra. Every twirl carried possibility, every bow or curtsy a silent question. Today's awkward shuffle at prom can't hold a candle to the electric thrill of locking eyes mid-spin, the room buzzing with whispered approval, gentlemen offering their arm for a stroll. Taking a walk wasn't just exercise, it was a stage for courtship. A gentleman would offer his arm, and with that small gesture came layers of meaning, respect, protection, and just the right amount of closeness without scandal. For the lady, accepting the arm was a public sign of favor, sparking whispers among neighbors who peeked from porches. It was the slow-motion equivalent of changing your relationship status, visible, undeniable, yet dignified. Compared to today's casual "you up" texts, an offered arm was courtship in motion, steady, visible, and infused with the poetry of simply walking side by side. Serenades under windows. Once upon a quieter night, before Bluetooth speakers and Spotify playlists, romance arrived on a breeze, carrying the sound of a guitar or a trembling tenor voice. Young men would stand beneath their beloved's window, singing ballads in hopes of stirring her heart, or at least waking the neighbors. Sometimes it was tender and sweet, other times hilariously off-key, but always bold. The serenade was equal parts vulnerability and performance, a declaration that couldn't be ignored. Today, sending a playlist link feels effortless. Back then, you risked public embarrassment just to say, "I'm thinking of you." That's commitment with melody. Pun-filled banter, Victorian Riz. Long before dating apps celebrated cheesy pickup lines, Victorians were already masters of pun-laden flirtation. Wordplay was their playground. Clever quips slipped into conversation like hidden winks. A gentleman might comment on a lady's current of thought while standing near a river, or she might joke that his compliments were in season as they strolled past apple trees. These playful exchanges weren't just humor. They were tests of wit, subtle sparring matches where charm outweighed boldness. Compared to today's "Are you from Tennessee? 'Cause you're the only 10 I see," Victorian banter dripped with elegance, patience, and a sly twinkle. Shared ice skates. When winter froze ponds into glittering stages, young couples found excuses to just happen upon each other with skates in hand. Sometimes, though, only one pair existed, so they shared. One would glide, the other would wobble along, both laughing as mittened hands clutched tighter for balance than romance alone required. Falling on the ice wasn't embarrassing. It was an opportunity. Every tumble meant a chance to catch, steady, or linger in an embrace disguised as necessity. Compared to today's carefully curated date nights, sharing ice skates was messy, cold, and utterly charming. The kind of memory that warmed hearts for years. Slow walks after Sunday service. When the final hymn faded and congregants spilled out into the sunshine, the real service sometimes began. Those slow, deliberate strolls down the lane. Young couples would linger behind the crowd, chatting about sermons, weather, or anything at all, stretching out every step to prolong the moment. Parents pretended not to notice, though watchful eyes weren't far away. The walk was equal parts innocent and electric, a chance to speak freely outside the pews. Today we rush to brunch or scroll TikTok in the parking lot. Back then, romance blossomed one unhurried step at a time, dust rising beneath Sunday shoes. Ice cream socials. In the sticky heat of summer, nothing brought people and hearts together like the town ice cream social. Organized by churches or community groups, these gatherings were part fundraiser, part matchmaking event, and part excuse to eat dessert in public. Young folks lingered near the churns, waiting for a chance to share a bowl or sneak a smile over a dripping scoop. Choosing a flavor for someone else was practically a love language, and offering the last bite, scandalously sweet. Today we queue up at Starbucks or swipe on dating apps, but once upon a time, romance melted right alongside vanilla. Barn dances. When Saturday night rolled around, nothing set the stage for young romance quite like a barn dance. Lanterns swung from rafters, fiddles struck up a lively tune, and the wooden floor shook with stomping boots. Shy glances turned bold as partners spun through squares and circles, laughter echoing between hay bales. A young man might work up the courage to ask for just one more dance, knowing the whole town was watching and silently approving. Compared to today's club scene with neon lights and DJs, barn dances were earthy, sweaty, and joyfully communal, where courtship unfolded one do-si-do at a time. Roller skating rinks. From the 1940s through the 1970s, roller rinks were the neon-lit playgrounds of young love. Couples held hands as they wobbled around the floor, hearts racing faster than their wheels. The DJ's choice of a slow song meant everything. Suddenly the lights dimmed, and skating side by side became the closest thing to flying together. A stumble or near fall was no accident. It was an excuse to cling a little tighter. Compared to today's dating apps, the rink was a live-action filter, equal parts awkward, exhilarating, and unforgettable, where romance rolled to the rhythm of disco balls and borrowed courage. Soda fountain dates. In the heyday of Main Street, the soda fountain wasn't just where you grabbed a cherry phosphate. It was the beating heart of small-town courtship. Perched on swivel stools, couples leaned close over tall glasses crowned with whipped cream, two straws twisting together like a promise. Ordering a sundae for two was bold, a public declaration that you were, at least for the moment, each other's. The clink of glass, the fizz of carbonation, and the hum of gossiping onlookers gave every sip its own soundtrack. Forget fancy cocktails. This was love, carbonated and served with a maraschino cherry on top. Drive-in movies. When drive-in theaters lit up the night sky, they offered more than just a cheap ticket to the latest Hollywood flick. They created a private little world inside every car. Couples cozied up under blankets, popcorn balanced precariously on the dashboard, while the big screen flickered like a backdrop to first kisses and nervous hand-holding. The movie was sometimes secondary. The real show happened in the front seat. Horns honked, kids ran between cars, and concession stands buzzed. But inside those rolled-down windows, time felt suspended. Compared to today's streaming marathons, drive-ins made romance cinematic, messy, magical, and wonderfully larger than life. Sock hops. In the 1950s, when gymnasiums transformed into dance halls, sock hops became the teenage stage for romance. Shoes were left at the door to protect the polished floors, so kids slid and spun in their socks to the crackle of rock and roll. A boy nervously asking for a dance meant everything, and slow songs under dim lights carried the weight of promises whispered without words. The air smelled of soda pop, floor wax, and possibility. Compared to today's school dances with elaborate DJs and lighting, sock hops were simple, sweaty, and unforgettable. The kind of night that lingered for decades. Chaperoned strolls in the park. A walk in the park might sound romantic, but in earlier days, it rarely meant privacy. Couples were often accompanied by a watchful sibling, a stern aunt, or even a whole gaggle of friends acting as unofficial referees. The stroll allowed conversation and gentle laughter, but every word was measured, every glance carefully guarded. Still, love has a way of slipping through cracks, hands brushed by accident, and shared jokes felt like secrets in plain sight. Compared to today's casual coffee dates, these walks were equal parts restraint and rebellion, where romance bloomed under the quiet supervision of rustling trees. County fairs, Ferris wheel moments. The county fair was more than cotton candy and prize pigs. It was a carnival of possibility. Amid the smell of popcorn and the bark of game callers, young couples found their way to the Ferris wheel. That slow, creaky rise above the fairgrounds created a pocket of suspended time, where a hand might inch closer, or a nervous confession slip out under the stars. Winning a stuffed bear at the ring toss, or sharing fried dough, only sweetened the night. Today's dates might be movies or coffee shops, but back then, love soared in painted gondolas and neon-lit summer air. Picnics with courting baskets. Long before takeout containers and charcuterie boards, romance was packed neatly into a courting basket. These woven carriers, often prepared by hopeful young women, held sandwiches, fruit, or a slice of pie wrapped in cloth. Sharing a meal under a shady tree wasn't just about food, it was a declaration. Each carefully chosen treat whispered effort and affection, and a man's delight in the spread was its own reply. Gossip might swirl if baskets were shared too often, but that only added spice. Compared to today's DoorDash dates, a courting basket was personal, thoughtful, and seasoned with equal parts love and sunshine. Church potlucks. In small towns, the church potluck was less about theology and more about casserole diplomacy. Long tables groaned under dishes, jello molds, fried chicken, pies still warm from the oven, each one a calling card of the woman who made it. For young couples, sharing a plate or lingering by the dessert table became a socially acceptable way to spend time together under the approving eyes of the congregation. A man might heap extra helpings of her dish, a quiet signal of admiration. Compared to today's casual brunch dates, potlucks blended faith, food, and flirtation. Romance served family style, with seconds encouraged. Perfumed love letters. Before smartphones and heart emojis, romance traveled slowly. Ink pressed to paper, sealed with wax, and sometimes kissed with perfume. A love letter carried not only words, but presence. The faint scent of lavender or rose turned each page into a keepsake. For the recipient, opening the envelope was like holding the sender close, even across miles. Lines of poetry, careful penmanship, and smudged ink spoke volumes about longing and devotion. Today, texts vanish with a swipe, but those letters lingered in drawers for decades. Perfumed notes weren't just messages. They were bottled emotions, unfolding one scented sigh at a time. Wax-sealed envelopes. In an age when letters carried secrets and hearts, the wax seal was both protection and poetry. A small pool of melted wax, pressed with a family crest, signet ring, or even a simple stamp, transformed plain paper into something sacred. Breaking that seal wasn't just opening mail. It was opening trust, intimacy, sometimes even destiny. Lovers used them to ensure no prying eyes tampered with their words, and the dramatic snap of wax carried weight no notification ping could match. Today's digital locks feel cold by comparison. A wax seal was personal, deliberate, and tinged with the heat of anticipation. Lockets with hair strands. Long before selfies and photo keychains, lovers kept each other close through the simplest, most intimate token: a lock of hair tucked into a locket. Snipped carefully, often tied with ribbon, it was a physical piece of the beloved, proof of presence in times of absence. Soldiers carried them into battle. Sweethearts wore them against their hearts. Opening that tiny clasp revealed not just hair, but hope, memory, and longing pressed between metal. Today, we trade playlists or share locations on apps, but once a single strand whispered, "I'm with you, always." Fragile, humble, yet achingly eternal in its sentiment. Scrapbooks of courtship mementos. Before Instagram feeds curated love stories in pixels, couples pieced together romance in scrapbooks. Pressed flowers, ticket stubs, handwritten notes, ribbon scraps, even a pressed four-leaf clover, all found their way between the pages. Each item carried a story: the dance they first shared, the fair where he won her a prize, the sermon where their eyes met. Turning those pages years later was like stepping back into courtship itself, memory stitched in paper and glue. Unlike today's fleeting snaps and stories that disappear in 24 hours, these scrapbooks aged with the couple, fragile, yes, but enduring, a tangible diary of love. Pressed flowers and books. A simple daisy, a rose petal, or a sprig of lavender could become a secret love letter when tucked between book pages. Pressed flat and kept hidden, the flower wasn't just decoration. It was memory captured in silence. Lovers exchanged them as tokens, each bloom whispering what words sometimes couldn't. Years later, when the book was opened, the faded petals carried with them the ghost of a moment, a summer walk, a shy smile, a promise made. Compared to today's digital snapshots, a pressed flower was fragile but timeless, a love story preserved in paper, scent, and delicate veins of color. Handcrafted valentines. Long before glitter bombs and mass-produced cards filled drugstore aisles, Valentine's Day meant scissors, lace, and imagination. Sweethearts cut hearts from colored paper, adorned them with ribbons or pressed flowers, and scribbled verses in their best handwriting. Each creation was unique, a little imperfect, but brimming with sincerity. A crooked heart or smudged ink didn't diminish the gift. It made it personal. Receiving one wasn't just a holiday gesture. It was proof someone had spent time shaping affection with their own hands. Compared to today's quick tap on a shopping app, these homemade Valentines were love made visible, delicate, and enduring. Calling card albums. In the 19th century, collecting calling cards was more than a hobby. It was social currency. Families kept ornate albums filled with the delicate, often hand-embossed cards left by visitors. For young ladies, these albums became quiet chronicles of attention, admiration, and sometimes budding romance. Flipping through them was like scrolling a Victorian contact list, each name carrying whispers of possibility. A suitor's card tucked among the pages meant he had made his call, and perhaps his intentions known. Unlike today's messy inboxes, calling card albums were curated, elegant, and tangible proof of connections, each page fluttering with social anticipation. Soldier's sweetheart pillows. During wartime, when distance stretched thin the thread of love, sweethearts stitched comfort into fabric. Sweetheart pillows were hand-embroidered cushions, often bearing patriotic symbols, names, or tender phrases sent by soldiers to loved ones back home. They weren't just decorative, they were tangible hugs, soft reminders that affection endured across oceans and battlefields. Placed on beds or couches, they turned absence into presence, each stitch a quiet promise of return. Today, we text heart emojis across time zones. Back then, love traveled by needle and thread. Fragile, colorful, and deeply personal, these pillows carried hope stuffed gently inside their seams. Embroidered handkerchiefs. A simple square of fabric became a canvas for affection when stitched by loving hands. Embroidered handkerchiefs, often adorned with initials, flowers, or tiny hearts, were delicate tokens exchanged between sweethearts. Slipped into a pocket or tucked into a letter, they carried not just embroidery, but intention. Every thread a quiet declaration. For soldiers, such keepsakes offered courage. For couples at home, they were whispered reminders of devotion. Unlike today's flashy gifts or digital pings, these handkerchiefs were humble yet enduring. The kind of love you could literally hold close. Soft, personal, and handmade, they spoke volumes without uttering a word. Photo booth strips shared in wallets. Before selfies filled camera rolls by the thousand, love was captured in 4 grainy frames pulled from a photo booth. Couples squeezed into the tiny curtain-draped space, laughing, blushing, or sneaking a daring kiss as the camera clicked. The resulting strip, creased, sometimes smudged, was more than a picture. It was a pocket-sized promise. Tucked into a wallet or locket, it traveled everywhere, worn soft by time and handling. Unlike today's filtered snapshots that vanish into the cloud, photo booth strips were tangible, imperfect, and endlessly cherished. A reminder that sometimes the best memories come crammed into a space just big enough for 2. Sitting room visits under supervision. Courtship often unfolded not in candlelit privacy, but in the bright, watchful space of the family sitting room. A young man would call on a lady at her home, where they'd converse politely, always within earshot of parents or siblings stationed nearby with busy work. The crackle of the fire, the ticking of the clock, and the occasional throat clearing of a vigilant father made every word carefully chosen, every glance charged. Yet within those boundaries, affection grew. Today, we bemoan chaperones as buzzkills, but back then, the sitting room was both stage and safeguard for romance, propriety, and whispered beginnings. Bundling boards, colonial oddity. In colonial America, courting could take a curious turn with the practice of bundling. A young couple, often in winter, might be allowed to share a bed, but separated by a sturdy wooden board or tightly sewn sack meant to preserve modesty. The idea was practical, warmth, yet supervised, no funny business. Parents sometimes even approved, believing conversation in such close quarters revealed true compatibility. To modern eyes, it's bizarre, like speed dating meets medieval carpentry. But in its time, bundling was a peculiar mix of restraint and opportunity. Romance, after all, has always found ways to exist within rules, however awkward. Courting candles as timers. In some households, romance was literally measured by firelight. A courting candle, set in a special holder, burned as a timer during a suitor's visit. Parents would adjust the height of the candle, tall for approval, short if they weren't keen on the match. When the flame guttered out, so did the evening. The symbolism wasn't lost on nervous couples who felt every drip of wax like a ticking clock. Compared to today's endless texting threads or Netflix marathons, these visits had built-in boundaries. Courting candles reminded everyone that love could flicker warmly, but never burn past curfew. Brothers tagging along. Few things tested budding romance like the ever-present younger brother trailing a couple's every move. In many families, sending a sibling along on a walk or outing was less about trust and more about insurance. The brother's job? Keep things proper, report back, and maybe annoy the suitor just enough to prove his patience. For young couples, it was equal parts obstacle and comedy. Whispered conversations interrupted by teasing, stolen glances shielded by exasperated sighs. Today, third-wheeling might mean a chatty roommate, but back then, it was often family-sanctioned. Love had to bloom not just in secret, but under sibling surveillance. Porch light talks. For many young couples, the night didn't end at the front door, but on the porch, under the soft glow of a lantern or the buzz of a single bulb. Parents lingered inside, curtains occasionally twitching, while the couple stretched every second of conversation before curfew. Laughter carried into the night air, hands brushed by accident, and sometimes the silence between words said the most. The porch became a liminal space, public enough to be proper, private enough to spark. Today, we linger in parking lots after dates. Back then, love was measured in minutes beneath a faithful porch light. Letters screened by family. In an era when handwritten notes carried the weight of confession, privacy wasn't always guaranteed. Families, especially protective parents, often intercepted or read courtship letters before they ever reached their intended reader. A suitor's flowery lines might be scanned for impropriety, tone, or even spelling, with judgment passed long before the girl unfolded the page. For couples, it was frustrating, but also a test. Only patience and sincerity survived the scrutiny. Compared to today's encrypted texts and disappearing messages, love once had to clear the stern gatekeepers of family honor. Romance wasn't just between two hearts, it had an audience. Group courting at socials. Romance in earlier times often unfolded in the safety net of the crowd. Church picnics, barn dances, quilting bees. These socials doubled as matchmaking arenas where young couples could talk and laugh, but never entirely alone. Surrounded by friends, cousins, and watchful elders, the setting kept courtship both wholesome and strategic. A shared laugh during a group game or a partner swap in a dance might spark something real, while gossip from the gathering carried news of every glance. Compared to today's one-on-one dinner dates, group courting was a community affair, half romance, half performance, with everyone keeping score. Curfews, enforced by fathers. For many young suitors, the most intimidating part of courtship wasn't winning a girl's heart. It was facing her father at the door. Curfews were strict, sometimes punctuated by the not-so-subtle sound of a clock striking, or the unmistakable clearing of a throat from the hallway. A father's presence loomed like a built-in alarm system, ensuring visits ended before reputations, or patience, wore thin. For couples, every minute before that curfew felt borrowed, precious, and just a little rebellious. Today, missed texts or late replies cause tension. Back then, it was the father's stern gaze reminding everyone that time was up. Courtship windows. Amish tradition. Among the Amish, privacy and propriety blended in a uniquely simple way. The courtship window. A young man would visit a young woman at her home, and instead of being ushered inside, they'd talk through an open window late into the evening. The setup allowed conversation and closeness without breaking community rules on modesty or supervision. Neighbors might stroll by. Parents might hear from the next room. Yet within that frame of wood and glass, young love quietly unfolded. Compared to today's late-night phone calls or video chats, the courtship window was a literal pane between hearts. Transparent, humble, and tender. Neighborhood gossip as unofficial referee. In small communities, romance never really stayed between two people. It was practically a public sport. Neighbors on porches, women at quilting circles, or men at the barbershop became self-appointed referees of young love. Every stroll, every glance, every late-night porch talk was noted, whispered, and sometimes exaggerated. While it could be maddening for couples craving privacy, gossip also carried weight. Approval could smooth a courtship, while disapproval could end it before it began. Today's relationships face online commentary. Back then, it was the sharp-eyed neighbor 2 doors down. Love wasn't just personal. It was community property, judged in whispers. Standing when a lady entered. Once considered the height of courtesy, rising to one's feet when a lady entered the room was more than a habit. It was respect in motion. The gesture signaled attentiveness, acknowledgement, and a touch of deference, all without a word spoken. For young men hoping to impress, it was an easy way to show good breeding and earn approving nods from watchful parents. The act carried weight. It wasn't about superiority, but about honoring presence. Today, most of us barely glance up from our phones, but once upon a time, love and manners alike began with the simple grace of standing, hand-kissing greetings. There was a time when a gentleman didn't just shake hands. He bowed slightly and lifted a lady's hand to his lips. The hand kiss was equal parts ritual and romance, a gesture that conveyed respect, admiration, and just enough daring to make hearts flutter. Done correctly, it was brief and graceful, never sloppy or presumptuous. For some, it was the highlight of a formal introduction, the moment when interest was quietly declared. Compared to today's casual fist bumps or half-hearted waves, the hand kiss carried weight, a silent spark, a brush of warmth, and a memory sealed in a single touch. Bowing and curtsying. Once upon a time, introductions weren't complete without a graceful bow or curtsy. These gestures were miniature performances, rehearsed to signal respect, humility, and refinement. A young man's bow showed deference, while a young woman's curtsy offered elegance and poise. Both silent exchanges that spoke volumes before words even began. For courting couples, these rituals added a charged layer. A slightly deeper bow, a longer held curtsy, all whispers of interest hidden in formality. Today, greetings are a casual nod or quick, hey, but back then, romance could tip its hat or bend its knee before love ever found its voice. Saving the last dance. At community balls or school dances, the final song of the night carried a weight all its own. To save the last dance for someone was more than courtesy. It was a declaration. It meant, out of everyone here, you're the one I want to end the night with. Couples swayed under fading lights, knowing eyes were watching, and that simple choice could set tongues wagging for weeks. For shy suitors, it was the bravest move of the evening. Today's playlists end on shuffle, but once upon a time, the last dance was the closing chapter of a romantic story, offering a cloak over puddles. In an age when streets were muddy, Carriages splashed water, and hems brushed the ground. A gentleman's cloak, or sometimes his coat, became more than clothing. Laying it across a puddle so a lady could cross without soiling her dress was the height of gallantry. It was impractical, goodbye dry coat, but unforgettable. A small sacrifice that spoke volumes about devotion. Whether genuine care or theatrical flair, the gesture lived on in stories and sighs. Today, we might offer an umbrella or unlock the car door, but once, romance meant ruining your best cloak just to keep her shoes spotless. Polite doorbell rings. Before texting "here" from the driveway, a suitor had to brave the front porch and ring the bell, politely, never insistently. That single chime announced his presence not just to the young lady, but to her entire household, often including the father who answered first with a measured stare. The waiting that followed, shuffling feet, adjusting a tie, smoothing hair, was its own nervous ritual. A doorbell wasn't just a button. It was a threshold between public formality and private hope. Compared to today's casual honks or quick pings, a polite ring was romance distilled, respectful, vulnerable, and brimming with anticipation. Walking a date home safely. In days before rideshares or late-night texts, the simple act of walking a young woman home was both duty and privilege. A gentleman offered his arm, ensuring she reached her doorstep without worry, whether through darkened streets or muddy lanes. The journey was often the sweetest part of the evening, filled with quiet conversation, nervous laughter, or comfortable silences that stretched deliciously long. For her, it was safety wrapped in courtesy. For him, it was stolen time before parting. Today we send "text me when you're home," but once, the escort itself was the tender punctuation to a night well spent. Gentle compliments on attire. Once, compliments were less about bold declarations and more about subtle appreciation. A gentleman might remark on the color of a lady's ribbon, the elegance of her gown, or how her bonnet suited her face, all delivered with restraint and sincerity. Too much flattery was frowned upon, but a well-placed compliment could brighten cheeks faster than rouge. For women, these words confirmed that effort was noticed. For men, it was a safe way to hint at admiration without scandal. Today, we hype each other's fits with emojis and fire symbols. But back then, a single gentle phrase could make hearts race. Sending flowers with coded meanings. In the language of flowers, known as floriography, every bloom carried a secret message. A suitor might send roses for love, violets for faithfulness, or daisies for innocence. Each bouquet a whispered sentence wrapped in petals. Even the color mattered: red for passion, yellow for friendship, or jealousy, depending on the guidebook. Receiving flowers wasn't just pretty. It was decoding a love letter in blossoms. For young couples, the thrill was in the subtlety. What he dared to say, what she dared to interpret. Today, texts arrive with emojis, but once a bouquet spoke louder than words, fragrant with intent. Keeping gloves or hats spotless. In the days when attire spoke louder than introductions, a spotless pair of gloves or a perfectly brushed hat was more than fashion. It was character on display. A gentleman arriving with smudged gloves or a dusty brim risked signaling carelessness, while immaculate accessories suggested respect, discipline, and genuine effort for the lady he hoped to impress. These details, small as they seem, carried the weight of first impressions. Today, we stress over the right shoes or a clean haircut. Back then, romance could hinge on the polish of a glove or the tilt of a hat, pristine and purposeful. Sharing sodas with 2 straws. At the corner soda fountain, nothing said "we're sweet on each other," quite like one tall glass with 2 striped straws. Leaning close over the frothy top, a couple sipped in unison, pretending not to notice their knees brushing beneath the counter. It was simple, affordable, and just a touch daring. public intimacy wrapped in innocence. Friends might tease, and the local gossip mill would churn. But for the pair sharing that cherry phosphate or chocolate malt, the world shrank to bubbles and laughter. Today we post latte art on Instagram, but once, love fizzed quietly in a glass built for two. Pies baked for suitors. Once upon a kitchen table, love was measured in crust and filling. A young woman might bake a pie, apple, cherry, or whatever fruit was in season, and present it to a suitor as both nourishment and signal. The golden crust whispered effort, the careful lattice hinted at care, and the first bite was a test of devotion as much as flavor. Families noticed too. A pie shared was no casual gesture. Compared to today's quick coffee runs or store-bought desserts, this was romance baked low and slow, fragrant with butter and sugar, seasoned with hope, and best served warm. Courting cakes, church tradition. In some communities, especially tied to church gatherings, a young woman might bake a small cake to present to the man she fancied. These courting cakes weren't extravagant, often simple sponges or fruitcakes, but they carried enormous meaning. Wrapped in cloth or offered at a potluck, the cake signaled interest far more clearly than words dared. For the young man, accepting and enjoying it was as good as saying yes. Sweetness wasn't just in the sugar, but in the courage it took to bake and give. Today we swipe right. Back then, romance was frosted, gifted, and eaten with gratitude. Lemonade stand mingling. On sweltering summer afternoons, the humble lemonade stand became more than a way for kids to earn pennies. It doubled as a cheerful stage for budding romance. Young men strolling by might linger longer than thirst required, dropping coins and clever lines in exchange for a cool glass and a warmer smile. For young women, offering an extra pour or a generous slice of ice hinted at favor. Neighbors saw it as innocent refreshment, but both parties knew better. Compared to today's coffee shop meetups, the lemonade stand was simple, sweet, and sparkling with the citrusy tang of possibility. Sundays at the diner. In the glow of neon signs and the hum of jukebox tunes, the local diner became a teenage courtship hotspot. Ordering a towering sundae, complete with whipped cream and a cherry on top, wasn't just dessert, it was a declaration. Couples leaned close in vinyl booths, spoons clinking as they negotiated bites, laughter spilling louder than the milkshake machine. Sharing that last spoonful could feel as daring as a kiss. Diners buzzed with gossip, chrome, and possibility. Each Sunday a small stage for romance. Today we split tapas or lattes. Back then, love was drizzled in chocolate syrup and served in glass. Picnic sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Before plastic wrap and pre-packaged meals, picnic romance often arrived in the crinkle of wax paper. A young woman might carefully stack sandwiches, ham, egg salad, or whatever the pantry allowed, and wrap them tight, each parcel a little gift of effort. Unwrapping them under the shade of a tree was almost ceremonial, the smell of bread and mustard mingling with fresh air and nervous laughter. These humble sandwiches weren't just lunch. They were love disguised as practicality. Compared to today's takeout containers or deli runs, wax paper picnics were simple, homemade, and sweetly deliberate. Romance packed between two slices of bread. Homemade bread as a gesture of care. Few things spoke of love more loudly than the smell of fresh bread drifting from the oven. A young woman might gift a loaf to a suitor, each golden crust and soft crumb whispering hours of kneading, waiting, and tending. Bread was more than food. It was sustenance, comfort, and a sign of devotion that couldn't be faked. Sharing it meant, I want to nourish you. I want to care for you. Today, we dash off to bakeries or swipe through delivery apps. But back then, a loaf of homemade bread was as heartfelt as any bouquet, warm and enduring. Candygrams, exchanged in schools. In mid-century classrooms, nothing stirred more excitement or nerves than the arrival of candygrams. Delivered on Valentine's Day or during fundraisers, these small slips of paper attached to candy bars or lollipops carried messages that could make or break a schoolyard crush. A simple "Be mine" scribbled in pencil could leave someone blushing for days, while receiving multiple candygrams practically crowned you king or queen of popularity. For shy sweethearts, it was the safest way to say what words couldn't. Today, we send texts with heart emojis, but once, sugar and a folded note delivered butterflies straight to a young heart. Chocolate boxes with hidden notes. A heart-shaped box of chocolates was never just about the sweets. It was the possibilities tucked inside. Beyond the glossy assortment of caramels and creams, clever suitors sometimes slipped a folded note beneath the candy tray or tied one under the ribbon. A simple message, "Thinking of you," or "Meet me Sunday," turned a store-bought gift into something thrillingly personal. The recipient had to search past nougat and fudge to find the secret, making discovery as sweet as the treat itself. Today, digital DMs arrive in seconds, but once, romance was hidden beneath a layer of chocolate and a little mystery. Coffee dates at the kitchen table. Before cafe chains and latte art, romance often brewed right at home. Inviting a suitor to the kitchen table for a steaming cup of coffee was intimate yet proper. A gesture that said, "You're welcome in my world." The clink of cups, the smell of fresh grounds, and the hum of a percolator set the stage for conversation that stretched long after the mugs were empty. No fancy syrups, no Wi-Fi, just warmth, simplicity, and presence. Compared to today's quick meetups in crowded coffee shops, a kitchen table coffee date was quieter, slower, and far more personal. Love poured one cup at a time. Wartime correspondence. When wars pulled sweethearts oceans apart, love clung to paper and ink. Soldiers wrote by candlelight in tents or barracks, pouring hope and longing into letters that traveled weeks before reaching trembling hands back home. Each envelope carried not just words, but smudges of dirt, hurried pen strokes, sometimes even pressed flowers or doodles in the margins. For those waiting, mail call was both dread and delight. Proof he was alive, proof she was remembered. Today, instant messages cross continents in seconds, but wartime correspondence was slower, heavier, and infinitely more cherished. A lifeline of love in uncertain times. Gas ration walking dates. During World War II, when gasoline was rationed and car rides became rare luxuries, gas ration walking dates. During World War II, when gasoline was rationed and car rides became rare luxuries, young couples turned to their own 2 feet. Walking dates weren't just practical, they became tender rituals. Strolling side by side through town or along country lanes, conversations stretched longer than the miles, and every pause beneath a street lamp carried possibility. Without engines or radios, the quiet of footsteps and laughter became the soundtrack of courtship. Compared to today's endless options for date nights, these walks were simple, frugal, and deeply human. Love, after all, doesn't need horsepower, just time, presence, and a path to share. Victory Garden visits. In the 1940s, when food was scarce and every backyard turned into farmland, the Victory Garden wasn't just about carrots and beans. It was about connection. Young couples strolled between rows of lettuce or paused at tomato vines, turning garden chores into chances for conversation. Helping weed a patch or carry a basket of cucumbers became acts of quiet devotion, proof that romance could blossom even in the soil of wartime sacrifice. Neighbors might see only vegetables, but for the couple, every seedling hinted at a future. Today, we flirt over grocery runs. Back then, love sprouted among cabbages and corn. Dance halls for factory workers. During the war years, when days were long and ration books thin, dance halls lit up the nights for weary factory workers. Beneath banners and swinging bands, men and women found a few hours of escape, trading heavy boots for polished floors, oil-stained uniforms for pressed shirts. For many, these evenings weren't just recreation, but opportunity. To laugh, to spin, to catch someone's eye across the room. Romance kindled quickly under the glow of string lights and brass horns, even if tomorrow meant another grueling shift. Compared to today's nightlife, these halls were raw, hopeful sanctuaries where love danced against fatigue. Sweetheart jewelry made from buttons. When money and metals were scarce, especially during wartime, love found its way into the humblest of materials. Sweethearts fashioned necklaces, rings, or brooches from simple buttons. Bright, mismatched tokens stitched with meaning. Soldiers overseas sometimes sent uniform buttons home, transformed into keepsakes worn close to the heart. These tiny trinkets weren't about extravagance, but presence, each one whispering, "I thought of you, even here." Compared to today's store-bought jewelry, button keepsakes were fragile, yet fiercely personal, born of ingenuity, sacrifice, and longing. Love didn't need gold or diamonds. It needed only a small circle of plastic, thread, and devotion. Blackout front stoop talks. During wartime blackouts, when cities dimmed their lights to stay safe from air raids, young couples found unexpected intimacy on the front stoop. With streets cloaked in darkness and stars burning brighter overhead, whispered conversations stretched long into the night. Neighbors sat nearby, but the quiet felt oddly private, the kind of stillness where every word and laugh carried extra weight. Sometimes a hand brushed against another, hidden safely by shadows. Compared to today's glow of street lamps and smartphone screens, blackout stoop talks were raw, simple, and unfiltered. Romance carved out of silence, danger, and the comfort of shared presence. GI Bill-inspired courtships. After World War II, the GI Bill reshaped not only education and housing, but also love stories. Returning soldiers suddenly had the promise of college, steady work, and even a home, all foundations for marriage. Young couples, weary from years of uncertainty, rushed to build futures together, fueled by hope and possibility. Courtship often moved quickly. Proposals sprang up on porches, weddings filled churches, and starter homes blossomed in brand new suburbs. Compared to today's long engagements and careful planning, these romances were bold and immediate. The GI Bill didn't just fund degrees and mortgages, it underwrote a generation's love and stability. Soldiers, tucking photos in helmets. On distant battlefields, where letters arrived slowly and silence felt heavy, many soldiers carried love in the form of a small worn photograph. Tucked into helmets or slipped behind dog tags, these images of sweethearts, wives, or family weren't just keepsakes. They were anchors. A quick glance before marching into danger reminded them what they were fighting for, a promise waiting back home. The edges curled, ink faded, yet the faces stayed sharp in memory. Today we carry whole galleries in our phones, but for those soldiers, a single photograph pressed close to the heart was enough to sustain hope. Women knitting socks for soldiers. During wartime, when supplies ran thin and winters bit hard, women picked up needles not just for necessity, but for love. Knitting socks for soldiers became a patriotic duty and a personal gesture, each stitch carrying warmth, care, and sometimes a quiet prayer. Sweethearts slipped notes or initials into the packages, hoping their gifts might reach familiar hands across the ocean. For the men who received them, those handmade socks were more than protection against blisters. They were reminders of home, of devotion waiting far away. Today, we send care packages. Back then, love was looped and purled into every row. Couples planning futures on ration stamps. During the lean years of the 1940s, romance had to fit within the tiny squares of ration books. Young couples, dreaming of weddings and shared homes, sat at kitchen tables piecing together how many stamps could cover sugar for a cake or flour for bread. Conversations about love and tomorrow were bound up with coupons and shortages, yet that planning was itself a form of intimacy. Each ration book became a blueprint for resilience, a love story written in scarcity. Today, we browse registries and Pinterest boards. Back then, futures were measured in coupons, hope, and careful sacrifice. Mixtapes of the 80s. Before Spotify playlists could be shared with a tap, declaring your feelings required hours of rewinding, recording, and just the right track order. The mixtape was a love letter in cassette form. Side A filled with upbeat tracks to make her smile. Side B stacked with slow ballads that said what words couldn't. Every pause button click was deliberate. Every song choice a confession disguised in melody. Giving someone a mixtape was both bold and vulnerable. Here's my heart pressed onto magnetic tape. Today we shuffle playlists, but once, love came wound tight on spools of ribbon. Slow dancing to vinyl records. When the party dwindled and the needle found its groove, young couples turned living rooms into dance floors. A vinyl record spun soft ballads or crackling jazz, filling the air with warmth and imperfection. Slow dancing at home wasn't about technique, it was about closeness. Arms around waists, heads resting on shoulders, the world shrinking to two people swaying in sync. Every scratch on the record, every pop between notes, only added to the intimacy. Today, we stream playlists in seconds. But back then, love moved at 33 revolutions per minute. Fragile, deliberate, and unforgettable under the glow of a lamp. Prom going steady pins. In the 1950s and 60s, nothing declared commitment quite like a going steady pin. Often a young man's letterman pin or fraternity emblem. It was proudly fastened to his girlfriend's sweater or dress, a public symbol that she was his and he was hers. Receiving one at prom was especially electric. Amid balloons, punch bowls, and slow dances, the tiny pin carried the weight of a proposal light. Friends noticed, whispers spread, and suddenly a couple was official. Today's relationships might hinge on a Facebook status or Instagram story, but once, love gleamed quietly from enamel and metal on a lapel. Drive-in diners with car hops. In the golden age of chrome and tail fins, drive-in diners were as much about courtship as they were about burgers and shakes. Couples pulled up in polished cars, headlights glowing, and were greeted by car hops gliding over on roller skates with trays balanced like magic. Sharing fries in the front seat or sipping a milkshake beneath neon lights turned every order into a date. Music poured from tinny speakers, laughter floated between parked cars, and the diner lot became a stage for romance on wheels. Today's fast food drive-thru is rushed. Back then, love came with ketchup, jukebox tunes, and chrome. Passing yearbook messages. Before social media walls and endless comment threads, the yearbook was the final canvas of a school year, and sometimes of young love. Students scribbled quick jokes, heartfelt farewells, or nervous confessions in the margins. A carefully chosen message, "Save me a dance this summer," or "Don't forget me," could mean far more than the pages themselves. For sweethearts, exchanging yearbooks wasn't casual. It was an invitation to leave a lasting mark. Doodles, hearts, or inside jokes became keepsakes pressed in ink. Today's posts vanish in 24 hours, but once, love lived forever in Sharpie on glossy, awkward high school photos. Locker notes folded like origami. In the days before texting under desks, school romance thrived on the art of the folded note. Passed between classes or slipped through locker vents, these scraps of paper became masterpieces. Triangles, squares, even hearts, carefully creased to hold a secret message. Inside, scrawled words confessed crushes, shared jokes, or asked the all-important, "Do you like me?" Check yes or no. The thrill wasn't just in the words, but in the ritual of unfolding, layer by layer, anticipation growing with each crease. Today's emojis arrive instantly, but back then, a crinkled paper triangle in your locker was pure handwritten electricity. Rotary phone, waiting by the hour. Before cell phones lived in pockets, love required patience and a sturdy chair by the rotary phone. Teenagers lingered in hallways, twirling the cord, waiting for that one call to come through. Every ring jolted the heart. Every busy signal tested resolve. And parents often eavesdropped from the next room. Long silences weren't awkward. They were part of the magic, just breathing together across the line. Compared to today's instant messages and read receipts, the rotary phone demanded effort, courage, and timing. Romance wasn't on demand. It was scheduled, anticipated, and cherished, each call turning the dial of the heart. Watching TV shows together apart. Long before streaming platforms offered synchronized watch parties, couples carved out connections by tuning into the same TV show at the same time, miles apart. Knowing your sweetheart was laughing at the same sitcom joke or tearing up during the same drama created a sense of shared presence, even without a phone call. The next day, whispers in the hallway or notes passed in class dissected every scene like a sacred ritual. Compared to today's instant reactions with memes and live tweets, this was slower, sweeter, two hearts in different living rooms, joined by rabbit ear antennas and the glow of a screen. Elvis-inspired sock hop flirtations. When Elvis shook his hips onto the scene, teenage courtship found a whole new soundtrack. At sock hops, his rock and roll hits filled gymnasiums, and suddenly, dancing wasn't just polite steps. It was rebellion with rhythm. Boys slicked their hair into pompadours, girls twirled in poodle skirts, and stolen glances turned bolder under the sway of Hound Dog or Love Me Tender. A daring wink or a playful spin on the dance floor carried more electricity than a dozen chaperoned strolls. Compared to today's TikTok dances, Elvis-era flirtation was louder, wilder, and thrillingly scandalous. Romance with a rock and roll heartbeat. Bowling alley dates. From the 1950s through the 70s, bowling alleys weren't just about strikes and spares. They were neon-lit stages for young love. Couples laughed over rented shoes, shared greasy fries from the snack bar, and exchanged playful jabs after a gutter ball. For shy suitors, teaching a date the proper form was the perfect excuse to hover just close enough, while a lucky strike earned cheers, and maybe a blush, from across the lane. The crash of pins and the smell of shoe spray became part of the soundtrack of courtship. Compared to today's laser tag or mini golf, bowling was classic, goofy, and endlessly charming. Hope chests. A hope chest was more than a piece of furniture. It was a treasure box of dreams. Young women filled them with linens, quilts, dishes, and small tokens, each item stitched with the anticipation of a future home and marriage. Often started in girlhood, the chest grew as years passed, becoming a quiet, tangible diary of preparation and hope. For suitors, the mention of a well-stocked chest was both a hint and a promise. She was ready to build a life. Today, registries and online wish lists serve the purpose. But once, love and practicality were stored in cedar-scented wood. Newspaper engagement announcements. Before social media made every milestone a scrolling headline, couples shared their big news in the local paper. An engagement announcement wasn't just a personal joy, it was a public proclamation, complete with formal portraits and carefully worded details about families, education, and sometimes even future plans. Neighbors clipped the notice, friends gossiped over breakfast tables, and distant relatives felt included through ink and newsprint. For the couple, it was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. Your love story set in type for the whole town to see. Compared to today's Instagram posts, these announcements were permanent, tangible, and elegantly understated. Courting rings. Long before diamond ads declared forever, young couples often exchanged simple courting rings as promises of intention. These bands, sometimes modest gold or even silver, weren't full engagements, but quiet signals. I'm serious about you. Worn proudly, they marked a stage between casual admiration and formal betrothal, sparking whispers in church pews or at community gatherings. The rings carried weight not in cost, but in meaning. A pledge of patience, a hint of futures being built together. Today's relationships toggle between situationships and status updates. But once, love could be declared with a plain ring and a steady promise. Wedding quilts, sewn by communities. In many towns, when a couple announced their marriage, women gathered to sew a quilt stitched with blessings. Each square might hold a unique pattern, a signature, or a scrap of fabric from everyday life. Neighbors' dresses, mothers' aprons, even a child's outgrown shirt. When pieced together, the quilt became more than warmth. It was a patchwork of community support and love, wrapping the new couple in shared history. Every stitch was a prayer, every seam a hope for longevity. Today, we register for blenders and air fryers. But once, marriage began under the weight of a handmade quilt, heavy with meaning. Trousseau preparation. Before weddings became Pinterest-perfect productions, a bride's preparation often centered on her trousseau, a collection of clothing, linens, and household essentials she assembled in anticipation of married life. Stored carefully in trunks or cedar chests, the trousseau represented both practicality and pride, filled with hand-sewn nightgowns, embroidered tablecloths, and neatly folded towels. Mothers and daughters worked together on these treasures, each stitch weaving tradition and expectation. For suitors, the mention of a well-prepared trousseau signaled readiness for partnership. Today's couples browse online registries, but once, a bride's future was laid out in fabric and thread, hope folded neatly beside every hem. Father's blessing tradition. For generations, a young man's courtship wasn't truly official until he asked for a father's blessing. Often nerve-wracking, the ritual carried weight, sitting across from a stern figure, hat in hand, explaining intentions with as much courage as charm. A yes opened the door to engagement. A no could stall romance indefinitely. Though some saw it as formality, for many families it was a sign of respect, a bridge between generations. Today, proposals often skip this step, favoring private moments or surprise videos. But once, love required not only two hearts agreeing, but also a father's steady nod of approval. Silver spoon gifting. Once upon a time, silver spoons weren't just dining utensils. They were tokens of affection and prosperity. Gifting a finely crafted spoon to a sweetheart or newly engaged couple symbolized nourishment, stability, and a touch of elegance for the future they were building. Sometimes engraved with initials or dates, these spoons became heirlooms, polished and passed down through generations. The gesture carried both practicality and poetry, love wasn't only about passion, but about setting a table together for years to come. Today, we sent registry links for kitchen gadgets. Back then, a single silver spoon whispered, "We will share everything." Rings engraved with initials. Long before elaborate proposal videos and custom jewelry hashtags, couples often mark their devotion with simple rings etched on the inside with initials or a date. These engravings, hidden against the skin, were intimate secrets, visible only to the wearer, yet carrying the weight of permanence. For some, it was a pre-engagement promise. For others, a wedding band personalized into a one-of-a-kind treasure. Every time the ring slipped on, those tiny letters whispered, "This love is yours and yours alone." Today, we chase flashy designs, but once, a few quiet scratches in gold held the whole story forever. Hand-fasting ribbons. Long before diamond rings and banquet halls, couples sealed their vows with hand-fasting, a ritual where ribbons or cords were tied around their joined hands. Each knot symbolized unity, binding two lives together in both literal and spiritual form. Colors carried meaning too: red for passion, blue for loyalty, green for growth. Sometimes it was temporary, a trial marriage, and other times it marked a lifelong bond. For families and communities, witnessing the binding was as sacred as any sermon. Today's weddings may feature hashtags and photo booths, but once, love was tied together with nothing more than ribbon and resolve. Love letters kept in cedar boxes. Before cloud storage and archived emails, love was preserved in cedar. Couples tucked bundles of handwritten letters, ink-smudged, ribbon-tied, into small cedar boxes, the wood's fragrance mingling with memories. Each note was a snapshot of longing, promises scribbled in margins, doodles in the corners, perfume lingering faintly on the page. The cedar protected against moths and time, keeping the past alive in scent and grain. Opening the lid years later wasn't just nostalgia, it was reliving courtship, heartbeat by heartbeat. Today, we scroll old texts until they vanish. Back then, romance was stacked carefully in cedar, meant to last a lifetime. And there you have it, 100 little sparks of love from the days before swipes, emojis, and seen receipts. Some were sweet, some a little strange, but all remind us that romance once thrived in the smallest gestures. Which forgotten tradition would you bring back? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. If you enjoyed this stroll down memory lane, don't forget to give the video a like, share it with someone who loves a bit of nostalgia, and of course, subscribe for more tales from the past. Here's to keeping old-fashioned romance alive.